Melondi lay back in bed as she texted Vadim. It had been a long shell, and while there was a lot of work to be done, she could afford to steal a few precious moments with him. The part of her that wasn't focused on the coming banquet missed him terribly. Tomorrow would be another day, with 3 left until the banquet. Vadim and his father were training the cadre of IOTC girls, and by his accounts they were working hard to learn. There were little tells here and there that it was exhausting work, and she loved him all the more for it. He had never asked anything of her, and after learning who she was, he was working himself twice as hard and without conditions. He was worried about her, and said so often enough, but right now she was worried about him, and tried to keep his spirits up. So what if I can command armies? He isn't doing it because of a command or an order. They texted back and forth about everything and nothing. It was easier that way. She could have called, but there were too many things in the back of her mind. She didn't want to worry him more about things he couldn't do anything about. Not when he was already giving so much, and at least the girls were keeping their hands off him. V. So what are your classes like for the rest of this week? Vadim hadn't asked about seeing each other before Shell. They both knew better, and it felt like he was doing his best to keep her spirits up too. M. Pretty easy. We put in the extra hours last week after dinner, so everything's covered. Just as well the war sim is done, though. That was eating a lot of time. She smiled at that. The game had taught her a valuable lesson. Any one of the girls could have pulled out and won the game for themselves, but none of them had. Maybe they weren't a team of elite death's heads, but they were her friends, and she trusted them. This coming Shell wasn't going to be a game, but she'd seen who they were over the last 2 weeks. Now it would count, but she wasn't diving in blind. V. The girls are talking about it, particularly their move with funds. They're curious about Professor Warwick too, since they heard he comes out here to cook. She felt a sudden stab of jealousy, wishing they were together. Sure, it was only chatting over Warwick and the game, but she was still missing him. Besides which, as soon as this was over, the only thing she'd be kissing was goodbye to her private time. Now her secret was out, it would be a miracle from Platara if there were any afternoons where a pod or two of IOTC weren't hanging about the restaurant. Great. Just great. M. That's great. She grimaced at her post. Did it look as jealous as she felt? She huffed once and started typing again, before he could wonder. M. It's France, by the way, but that was the hardest part. It might have been to give us more time this week, but I think Pris sold him. The English, German, and Italian armies made sure the monarchy went through, but he said he won't accept it for another game. V. That's probably just as well. The girls here were laying bets and had to call it all off. M. I'm not surprised. It was a fun game, but the material we had to watch after really wasn't. It was sort of a story about everyone involved, and it was personal. Like, disturbingly personal. V. Sounds like it was a good lesson then. I mean, a story only matters to the extent the people in it are changed. Good or bad, how can a story move you if you didn't move them? Melondi scooched back against her pillow and looked at the line. They finished the game, but Warwick had worn a look on his face that he wasn't entirely sure the lesson he'd been teaching had come across. At the time, she put it down to their solution not being what he'd expected. Now... M. How did I find such a wise boyfriend? V. You got very lucky. She grinned at that. Vadim was still the amazing guy who loved to cook for her, but he'd come alive in so many ways since they'd met. He dressed up now, and every so often there were signs of his father's confidence showing through. He wasn't the shy boy she found herself falling for. Instead, he was so much more than she'd ever hoped for. Presenting him to her mother was going to be interesting. The assumption had always been that Kalandri would take the throne, leaving her to an arranged marriage, ideally to a boy with connections. When her sister died, it hadn't been the time or the place to discuss such things. She hadn't even been home to do it anyway, but she hadn't had Vadim in her life either. Well, nothing's perfect. I'll make her understand. as long as I live through this. V. So everything is ready then? His text cut through her thoughts. Some final details would be passed out on the way to the banquet, but otherwise, they were ready as they were going to be. M. We are if you are. V. Desi too? I know she's cut her bangs. The girls were talking about it. Are you going to do what I think you are? Melondi looked over at her closet. There were plenty of clothes in there for Melondi, but there were also a couple of dresses that would suit any noble in the school, including Princess Kalira. Desi fit in them perfectly, and they had proven she could pull off an impersonation. Indara would be there. No one would be looking at her. Except for the person out to kill me. Who to be, or not to be? That's still the question. After revealing her identity to Vadim, she promised herself she'd never lie to him again. She stared at her omnipad, unsure of what to say. The trees sighed as the crisp morning wind caressed their limbs. The lake lapped contentedly at the shore. The grass rippled and waved cheerily under the breeze, and a crescent of one of the moons smiled benignly down through the playful clouds, while Kadira pondered Kalira's murder over breakfast. The food in the palace refectory was delightful as ever, but as the hustle and bustle of palace staff sounded all about her, she existed alone in the world of her thoughts. She filtered out the noise of other patrons in the refectory, followed by her annoyance at the word refectory itself. This cafe was her favourite on the palace grounds, and while it never failed to refresh, whoever named it a refectory was going a bit far. Was it Camaraderie? Given she brought me on her staff almost at once after retiring from the interior, probably not. It's the sort of thing she'd do, though. Camaraderie's death would be a masterpiece, and Kadira felt a sense of renewal that had nothing to do with her meal. But first things first. Before that magnum opus, far in the future, there was the vexing necessity of the here and now. The drone in the media was that the Empress was due back any time now, and while any time was touted to mean roughly 2 or 3 weeks, the tidings of comfort to the people were no joy to her. Camaraderie would expect Kalira to be safely dead before her return with the Empress. That created a limited window. Success later would be forgivable, but not so well looked upon as success that provided her noble ass the cover of deniability. It was, to be fair, a not unreasonable expectation from a woman who was usually anything but. Planning had always been Kadira's chosen tool for success. Often as not, she tracked 3 or even 4 targets at a time, learning everything she could in her quest for one perfect strike. Any fool could kill, but an ideal murder should appear like an accident, where no one looked deeper. Less ideal, but certainly acceptable, was a death that needed to be covered up. No one looked deeper because no one was supposed to. Kalira's death would not be the latter, at least in the conventional sense. How it was written for posterity was another matter, but why should she care? Posterity has never done a thing for me. She smiled at her jest, though the moment was short-lived. Looking over the broad expanse of the grounds from her seat by the window, her mind was lost in the problem. Kalira was not going to be killed at her academy. The impromptu plan to use Admiral Tejo had been inspired, but it had failed to take account of all the variables, particularly that human, Warwick. The deficit had turned a likely success into a regrettable failure, but regardless, the situation was clear. Even if Lamana Davari and her death's heads were not on guard, a death at the academy now would cause an absolute furor among the noble families. The media has seen to that. On the other hand, killing Kalira at the Northern Palace would put her directly under suspicion, and even the credulous would ask awkward questions. She had plans, and those plans required her career to flourish under Camaraderie. Kalira's death here in Camaradrie's home would see her doting patron feed one Kadira Sariva straight to the deeps, Failure had never been an option, but never more than now. Kadira picked up her omnipad and flipped through the banquet itinerary yet again. Everything was in readiness for the perfect event, a rare social occasion for the season, unblemished by the death of Princess Kalandri. While it would be lamented as a regrettable necessity that could not be postponed by every noble present, they'd all be lining up to pick the banquet tables down to the bones and shells. That part was already dealt with. The Northern Palace was mercifully undecorated by Camordri, who lavished her attentions on the palace gardens and her personal rooms. The rest of the vast complex largely reflected the restrained tastes of Empress Brindri. The banquet itself would be anything but, with a table unmoderated by such considerations. It would be lavish and vulgar and utterly delicious, even if there was going to be a large selection devoted to human food by a local caterer. While it was traditional to bow to the tastes of those honoured, species was seldom an issue. A local caterer who was well regarded, and something of a favourite with Kalira, would be handling matters. Considered one of the capital's better chefs, he was entirely qualified to run a banquet of this size. While his communications to the palace staff had been exuberant, they were mercifully infrequent and reassuringly in character, which only meant they were wildly extravagant within reasonable boundaries. Goddess, save me from flamboyant artists. At least the palace staff were sorting that. They spoke each other's language, and no problems had been reported. The guest list was more impressive than usual for such an event, but with the social season devastated by Kalandri's death and the official declaration of mourning, the banquet had unexpectedly become the event of the season. Invitations had been rapidly accepted, even sought after, though her sources had shown nothing unusual in that. The usual social parasites looking to preen and be seen. Her fingertips swiped listlessly over the omnipad, back and forth, then paused. The entertainment was to be human, but the entertainer, Akurun Doskulo. Where had she heard that name before? Something tugged at her memory, and she closed her eyes, opening the door to the palace of her memories. She drifted through the front hall, where she regarded items that had gained her notice, as if they were paintings in the gallery. She wandered through, studying each, lost in the world of her creation. There it was, a notice in the news. Keragon Doskulo, recently bereaved widower, and heir to the Doskulo Resources conglomerate, was... Kadira canted her head, recalling the article fully to mind, and smiled. She opened her eyes, the world of the refectory with all its sights and sounds and smells flooding back in on her. She ignored them all. Her spirit soared as she pulled up her comm line, and all was right with the world. Muifal? Oh, yes. She listened to Muifal's pleasantries without irritation. Yes, it is a very good morning, but no time for delay. Today is a day for getting things done. Now then, I need you to arrange a very special meeting with Keragon Doskulo. No, not his wives. Him. Alone. Yes, at once. It was early morning, just before breakfast, and Kzintshki sat in the common room, stewing. While she kept her Asaic under control, the anticipation gnawed at her. Her skin suit was ready. She had checked it 3 times. Her knives were sharp. While razor sharp, she sharpened them again out of sheer frustration. Her homework was complete. The study group was admirably effective in that, particularly Deshin. She was bored. Bored. The second day after Shell was usually such a productive day. Now, the world and everything in it seemed to be holding its breath in anticipation. It had been a heady feeling, for an hour or two. With days to go, she felt little but irritation. The room was empty except for Pris and Belder, who were chatting while Belder traded occasional messages with her intended husband. Past's face flashed through her mind, and she managed not to claw the sofa. Kzintshki furnishings were lamentably fragile with respect to claws. In every respect, really, except weight tolerance. The thought had fangs, but she spent an evening watching Sefer and Dasala practice with the spring diving competitions. The Kzintshki tolerance for water was understandable, and she set aside her deep aversion to the idea. Water was not the danger in Shil than it was on Pesh. After a time, she had to admit the pair were accomplished, even if it was not a skill that a Pezran would need. Though fragile, Kzintshki furnishings were suited to their function. Like their makers, clawing them out of pique would be wasteful and unseemly. Having buried that irritation, she focused on the true problem, which was not past at this time.
Dark Mother, I have to make conversation.
Slipping from her chair, she moved over to the one opposite the sofa, and stared. It was only polite to be invited into their conversation, so she did not blink. Her patience was duly rewarded.
Kzintshki?
Priscilla had noticed first and pulled a wavy lock of hair back over her shoulder. She canted her head in a cordial Kzintshki expression, while Belda followed suit.
Is something wrong? No.
Her Isaiah curled about her waist and flickered once, betraying calm with a silent eloquence, and she waited.
Okay.
Pris traded a look with Belda, who shrugged once.
It's just that you're staring. I mean, it's fine, we're sort of used to that. Are you sure everything's okay?
Belda supplied, setting aside her omnipad.
I noticed you get so utterly focused when you want something. Sort of like... Like what?
She focused serenely on Belda. Despite the mild irritation, she decided to make the concession and canted ahead. A bit.
It's just, I lived around Rakiri growing up.
Belda bit her lip before giving something that struggled between a smile and a grimace.
You've said that you don't like them very much, but they get pretty intent when they want something. Not trying to be rude, but you sort of do that, you know? I take no offense. Pezran and Rakiri are alike in some ways, but this is not a matter of food.
It was a magnanimous gesture, but Belda had meant well. She tasted the words and did not find them overly objectionable, so she pressed on to the difficult part.
I wish to share your companionship, if you do not mind.
Okay, sure. Belda gestured at the chair, but Kzintshki made no comment. She was already sitting down in it, although it was just as well they affirmed it was now hers.
So, I don't mind, but I am curious.
Pris sat back, resting her head on one hand.
You just never wanted to hang out with us besides our study group, and everything's fine. It's just... You want to know why?
Kzintshki regarded her. Priscilla was, as ever, impeccably turned out, yet wore no jewelry beyond the necklace in her house colours. She was regarded to be pretty, and Kzintshki considered her virtuous reverence to her family warband as a mark of good character.
Pezran value companionship greatly. Right. You threatened to tear Desi's ear off last week when she woke you for breakfast. Pezran value privacy greatly.
The pair exchanged a look that might be rich with significance, though the meaning escaped her. They did not understand, and while she had taken pains to explain the obvious to Deshin, as she feared, the girls tilted their heads almost in unison. It was distressing, but she would have to explain again. They were not challenging her. Not overtly, at least.
I will explain, if you wish to understand.
Kzintshki canted her head to one side again. It was an annoying habit, but she was unquestionably in the heart of the Kzintshki Empire. If their customs applied anywhere, it would be foolish to think it was not here, so she set aside her annoyance and waited.
I do.
Pris nodded and leaned forward. Since there was no food between them, she took it as an expression of genuine interest. Belda was already nodding and had set aside her omnipad. Since the conversation took precedence over communicating with her prospective mate, that had worth. She would return their interest with appropriate honor.
Peshrin, like my warband, live on ships. We are close to each other in all things, rely on each other. Our family is a sacred bond to us, but we have very little room. This is even true on Pesh, where habitable land is scarce, and because there is no space, that which we can call our own is important. Our privacy is sacred because it is so hard to find.
She watched them take that in, and to her gratification saw comprehension dawning.
That is understandable, yes?
Oh, yeah. I shared a bedroom with 2 of my sisters until I was 6. Pris nodded with a knowing look. While she doubted the girl understood growing up in the cramped confines of a starship with 3 sisters, cousins and kits underfoot, it still seemed like progress. It was progress, and she took some pleasure in that as the tall Shovanti looked at Belda.
Trust me, our fights over the bathroom were legendary.
I can see that.
Kind of.
Belda looked like she was chewing the concept over.
Our round chest is always full of people all day long, and we have boys, but there's so much room outside, I guess I never thought of it that way. Your family would be rich beyond measure to ours.
Kzintshki tried to keep any hint of jealousy out of her words, though out of prudence she held down her Asaic so it did not thrash.
We ranch Turoks. I thought your family was going to do that, here on Shill. They need a lot of land for a big herd.
Belda drew a deep breath. Kzintshki found her nice, but their lack of common ground made her difficult to know. Still, she listened intently. Belda seldom spoke of her work in ranching, and while her family was set to inherit lands here on Shill, Turoks were an unknown, other than as dinner.
What kind of animals do you have on Pesh? It's Pesh, right?
Kzintshki considered that.
Yes, it is Pesh. And my people raise oryx. They need little land, and little land is something we have in abundance. They are delicious, though, and considered a great prize.
Prize? Belda brightened up. Like at a fair? We have those, too.
For theft, Kzintshki blinked once, nodding in affirmation, is considered good luck for a wedding. If a bride can steal an oryx for their husband's warband, there are seldom fights at the wedding feast.
Seldom? Pris frowned. Why would there be fighting at all? I mean, it's a wedding. It's supposed to be a happy occasion, not bickering and arguing.
There are always matters over who killed who. Weddings are typically between allied warbands, but not always. To bring something back, particularly from an enemy, shows the bride's skill. If they are caught, they're usually let go with just being shaved. Unless it is a bitter enemy, then...
Kzintshki's Asaic flowed with an elegant twitch, but she had the growing feeling she was losing them.
It's a wedding. People can be understanding about these things.
Wow, and here I was worried about showing Liam around Willist. Got to admit, I never imagined that one. Belda giggled a moment before leaning in. So, I mean, we know you met a guy. Would you take him back to Pesh, or...
I have never been to Pesh.
Kzintshki blinked slowly as she considered it. She had been born on a ship and considered herself fortunate. Dark mother, why would she go back there?
I was born in Alliance space, but we managed to get out. We took work in the consortium for over 3 of your years, before our Pathfinder gained our escape and negotiated our contract here with Duchess Iliana.
You lived in the consortium? Pris blinked. Kzintshki avoided taking offense. Shovanti did it constantly, without any regard for context.
What's it like? I mean, we hear stories and see the videos, but that's not like living there. I loathed it.
Her Asaic thrashed freely, and she didn't bother to pin it down, as the memory of it filled her.
My warband was tempted there by promises of wealth, but wealth there is only for the few. The rest are little better than indentured servants. The cities look, I don't know, different, but just as sophisticated as anything on Atherton.
Pris looked at her uncertainly.
It is the advertising. It was revolting,
Kzintshki said, carefully picking through her bitter revulsion.
Well, everybody hates ads, but it's not like in the videos you see. It is everywhere, on every wall, every hall, every facade. There is no escape from it, day or night.
She held up her hand, shaking her head.
Pejrin understand living without what we need, but it is insidious. Our very lives are a threat to the way night crews see the galaxy. That's... okay, I don't get that. Do you, Belle?
Pris looked at the Willis girl, who shrugged.
Okay, we don't get it. Explain? I mean, a threat seems a little much. You're ready to kill someone and you're threatened by an ad? I mean, goddess, don't tell Nestha. You are making fun where you should not. Everything in the consortium has its price.
Kzintshki felt her claws flex and slid them back.
The power of an advertisement is threatened by anyone living a happy life, because its only purpose is to say that you are worthless and should be unhappy if you do not have whatever it is selling you, with sex and violence and lies. They say your life is deficient if you do not spend your money on what they sell. That is the consortium. It is built on creating endless debt, want, and need. It is vile.
She spat out the last word, as she shivered in raw irritation. Could Shulvanti nobles understand such an idea?
Pejrin know what it is like to live without the things we need to survive. We do not need things blaring out that our lives are defective if we do not own the latest air car. Damn, I never thought of it that way. I guess they do sort of sell you on the idea you can be better just by spending money. I was kind of feeling that way about Liam when I took him out, you know. Embarrassed that Willis isn't good enough.
Belder had the decency to look appalled.
We only have a couple of cities in my world, but they don't do that. I mean, there are ads here and there, but not like that. People don't have the time for it. Everyone pretty much shares the work on Willis. We aren't wealthy, but we all get by. Why didn't you go back to the Alliance? The Alliance is worse. There is wealth there for a few, but people... planets. Everyone fights over the scraps of nothing. Nothing is sacred. The people live there without rules and call it freedom, Kzintshki said quietly.
She had suffered at the hands of her former classmates who tormented her endlessly. None of them could understand life in a slum, in an empire built on desperation. If her new classmates, if Desi, her band sister, had not done the same, it was still beyond their experience. You cannot imagine living in a favela stretching to the horizon. I grew up in one on a world named Elris, where my bandmothers purchased our ship. It was awful. The admission made her burn with shame, but they were listening, and it would dishonor herself to lie.
You have no idea how fortunate you are, Belder. Well, I guess I'll never look at a park the same way.
Pris reached out tentatively, in a gesture that meant well, and she blinked in acknowledgement.
There are parks on Pesh. They are valuable training grounds for children before adulthood in their warband, she said,
calming her aside and glad to change the subject. She would rather be chatty than return to it.
Leaving the Alliance upset my eldest sister because she had to leave the Girl Scouts. It's not like she would have gained a kill ring for her ear, but she was working on a merit badge. She went on about it for years.
A merit badge? Belder was wearing a sickly smile as if something were crawling up her leg.
They are Girl Scouts, she said with emphasis.
Shulvanti, It was clear she was losing them both again.
Who do you think keeps watch while you steal an Aurex? Dark mother. Where is Deshin when I need her? It's time for breakfast.
Melondi trudged over from her bed and managed to only sway twice. It had been a late night. Again. No one would blame her for missing breakfast. Was it a crime to get some sleep around here? She tried to pry her eyes open. Even the cold floor didn't help wake her up, and she leaned her head on the wall, unwilling to admit entry. What I wouldn't give for one of the golden glaives right now. Just one. The moment's respite was shattered by another pounding on her door, and she reared back, yanking the door open. This better be good, or I swear I will tear your ear off. Deshin barged past her unsteadily and slammed the door. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes bloodshot with deep purple veins, only making the bags under her eyes look worse. Despite herself, she stared. Desi, you look like shit. Desi narrowed her gaze, looking her up and down in return.
You sound like Kzintshki, and you don't look like a basket of fruit yourself.
What? I just wanted to get some sleep. You know, sleep. Before breakfast. She huffed. You sleep and eat too. I know. I've seen you.
Yeah? That was before you had me going over these files on the invasion.
Desi slid down to sit on a pile of folded laundry, clutching her underpad.
You'd better sit down.
Tom stared at the front desk of the campus hotel, pondering the interface. AutoCAD for one thing, but he'd expected a receptionist. No such luck. He peered at the oversized omnipad, pondering how to ring through. It was still early, but if he could just meet with Monsignor Bassino, maybe he could get something sorted. He'd only had one cup of coffee before Miv shoved him out the door. Sooner started, sooner done, she said cheerfully. He glared at the interface balefully, trying to figure out what arcane combination of commands will make it act like a phone and call the room. The fiendish device was winning the battle of wits. He was blaming a lack of caffeine when his train of thought was interrupted.
Tom! How are you, lad?
Jama Ramirez usually cut a dashing figure when not ensconced in the cavernous warren he called an office. Just now he looked... Tom sighed inwardly. Miv was right. It was simplest just to ask, Jama, what are you doing here?
Oh. Well, no, I was over here visiting Akame. She's, having a wee bit of fun with two of your people and had me over to visit.
Jama swayed slightly, though his accent was no worse than usual. Sober. Just exhausted then.
The Sams. Wonderful people, lad. Heh.
Oh, God, no. That's great. I'm glad you had fun. I don't suppose you've seen another human around? Tom swallowed, pondering the recipe for disaster. I need to meet with him.
Ah, yes, Jama grinned. Interesting fellow, that. We all ran into him last night. Older, looks tight as a Turux's... He's a priest, then?
Tom sighed as a vision of fire and brimstone yawned beneath him. For some reason, the devil looked exactly like Marlin Perkins. He was lowering Jim into a cobra pit. Yes, he's a Monsignor. That's a kind of priest. I don't suppose you know where to find him. I've been dealing with this... thing, he said, waving at the desk omni in frustration.
Oh, aye. We saw him this morning, too, for a wee bit. And these years, I didn't know they had such a good breakfast buffet here. Just the thing after being up all night.
Jama grinned cheekily.
Anyway, we saw him off. He's gone to the library, but I told him all about you.
Marlin Perkins raised his pitchfork in salute. Solani Tonis wound through the library carefully. So often she'd watched as the objective, Kalira, made her way through these very halls, but this was seeing them with her own eyes. As she pulled open the door to the Earth exhibit, she paused in trepidation. This is a good idea. In and out, find a few songs in the database, pick over them later. As if. The atmosphere in the bunker was good. Agent Davari letting them outside more was of course a celebration, but closing down surveillance on Tom Warwick's bedroom was rather less so. Not that she was likely to get the archive footage erased. Not yet, at least. 11 horny women were not giving that up without a fight. At least not before they went on leave again. Thank the goddess Sitar and Biona promised her they'd get it erased, if she landed Warwick. No pressure there. But win or lose, at least she wouldn't end up the star of her own show. She blushed deeply at the thought. It was far too early to claim victory, even if Mever and Shalea liked her. She still had to navigate a date, somehow. In the meantime, finding a bit of music, something that could express herself in a way he'd understand, was a good idea. She paused as she wound her way past the first row of exhibits. An elderly human, the human priest he'd been upset about, was browsing through the exhibit marked as Asian art. Warwick, Tom, had stripped it of weaponry after curious visitors asked too many awkward questions. She stepped forward and cleared her throat. Mio Dio, mi hai fatto tresalie, the human exclaimed as he started, before running a hand down over his long black coat. Solani backed away, trying not to loom over the little male. She'd never seen Tom wearing anything like that, and supposed they were vestments. Truthfully, she hadn't expected anyone here this early in the morning, and glanced around before steadying herself. Biona, Yala and Diani should be watching the objective. Diani has me up on monitor too. I just know it. Excuse me, I didn't mean to bother you. What had Warwick called him? Ah, no. Scusami, brava donna. I was just startled. The elderly man clapped his hand together before him and looked this way and that. Sono reso umil. It is very humbling to see my world on display like this, but it is no bad thing. Our Lord loves wondrous diversity. Solani offered him a smile but came no closer. The priest was taller than most Shilvanti men, but not by much, and she didn't want to make him nervous. I'm glad that you like it. Everyone here is very proud of Professor Warwick's work. There's talk of it going on tour in the spring. Oh, bene. He offered up a bright smile and stepped forward, offering his fist. Surprised, she bumped it politely. My name is Monsignor Santino Basilio of the Order of Dominic, and I'm very pleased to meet you. You know Professor Warwick, perhaps? Oh, I'm Solani Tonis, and, I know him a little bit. She could feel herself blushing, but he was a priest. Surely she couldn't go too badly wrong, as long as she was polite. I'm very pleased to meet you too. Your Vatico is excellent. How do I address you? Monsignor is correct. Barsino looked about conspiratorially, as if they weren't alone in the room. Between us, I have always preferred to be called Friar. But what brings you here, child? Perhaps I am the one intruding. She blushed and pointed toward the end of the room. Oh, no, Friar. I was just here to look up some music. I'm trying to tell someone very special to me how I feel about them, and I don't know how. Ah, nuovo amor, young love. That is very fine. And you have come to hear human music. Bene. Basilio smiled serenely, clasping a hand over his heart. Young people think that, just because I am a friar, that I know nothing of such things, yet I have beheld love such as transcended time. A love that ran roughshod over moral dogmas, laughed in the face of adversity, and rent asunder the shackles of social convention and religious doctrine. Un amor di passione, a tender love, selfless and undying, which was not bad for two gerbils on the opposite sides of a glass partition. Solani blinked, as the priest grinned at her expectantly. Excuse me?
Ovviamente le non sa cosa sia.
Barcia shook himself.
A small jest. Uno molto piccolo. But, of course, you do not know what I am going on about. I was just thinking how lovely it is. Un grande complimento. That you want to use human music. It gives me hope for my mission. Tell me, who is the lucky man to win your affections so? Honestly, Friar, it's kind of a secret. Just mine, a bunker full of death heads, an agent of the interior, definitely Mivert, and probably Shalea. Maybe a secret, probably not, she amended. It has been many years, but the sanctity of the confessional is ever with me. Your secret is safe. He smiled, and she liked the way his eyes twinkled. I appreciate that, Friar. Honestly, if it's just between us... Certamente, Barcia smiled. My word before God. Well, honestly, it's for Professor Warwick. But I was wondering if I should find something for his wives, too. What do you think, Friar?
Lamanna Davari considered her daily schedule as she closed down her omnipad. There were countless details to attend to, but at least she had room for one last lingering task. It had waited for weeks now, and at least tomorrow would provide a welcome respite to see it completed. Princess Clera's companions were all vetted for security. While Deshimpelevon had been an unwelcome surprise, she'd been seen too as soon as her background came to light. At least tomorrow, she could put the matter to rest. A few words with Duchess Eliana's secretary had been more than sufficient. She finally had a morning appointment to meet with this Pezrin woman, Maraket of the Natashja. It should be simple. When Tom Steinberg got home from the midnight shift, he beelined for the fridge. It was early morning, but he'd been up all night and he slept to get her a Bloody Mary, extra horseradish, before sinking into the chair in the basement, barely holding back a sigh of relief and contentment. He slid deep into the cushions, not daring to fight the beast consuming him, as his eyes threatened to close. Far as Tom was concerned, he deserved to relax. The kids were at school all day. In the meantime, a drink. As soon as he finished, Tom looked around. Where had he put his omnipad? Yeah! Tom looked down. A certain stabby frog stood at his feet, pad in hand. Thanks, buddy. Tom swore to God. Shanky was getting smarter and smarter, or maybe Tom was getting dumber and dumber. He certainly felt like he was. Grabbing his device, Tom set up his countermeasures. First up was a little device that had an official name, but Tom called it the Jiggler. Even on Earth, since the 1960s, there had existed devices that could reconstruct speech by reading vibrations on glass. Tom's Jiggler vibrated a mercury blob, so it could shake the window in random patterns. Next up, Tom slid a device resembling a micro SD into his omnipad. Adam had a similar scrambler in his own pad. It was keyed to Tom's scrambler so it could decipher whatever stream of bullshit Tom sent him. Anybody else listening in would hear static. Third up... Tom ran back upstairs, turning on the omniscreen mounted on the wall. Yo, Shank! Yeah? Whatever you watch, turn the volume way up! Tom knew Shanky would love that. The little green ball was a straight-up hellhound sometimes. Yeah! Shanky excitedly jumped up on the sofa, and soon the house was awash with the thoughtful dialogue and beautiful sound design of the Midnight Meat Train. Classy. Tom took a sip from his pitcher before going back downstairs and getting on the line with Adam. Thomas. Tom took a long pull from his drink. Got bad news. He has good news, but he loved his ridiculous coded speech. Grandma came down with the anthrax again. The virus is planted, 0 arrests were made, and they're none the wiser. Ah, that's a shame. I'm sorry to hear that. Call me when she gets better. Good. I'll call you with more orders. Hold on a sec. Where did you say you were taking the girls tonight? Figured I'd try the place out myself. Family friendly? Where are we meeting? Will it be a handoff? Well... Tom swore he could hear Adam drinking something. Probably tea if Classy was there. Very rude to do on the phone. He took a sip of his own poison. Thinking the Black Urchin. Park by the Transformer. It'll be crowded. We'll meet at the Black Urchin. Look for a mark on the Transformer, then head inside. There are a lot of moving parts, so it's an in-person meeting. Soon as Adam hung up, Tom called Davy at her work. Hey babe, I'm home. Then I was thinking... What Avie said next chilled him to the bone, but in a good way. Wait, pregnant? Oh lord, I need to ask for a raise. Kadira Sariva set down her omnipad and considered the morning. Instead of a pitiful widower, Keragon Dorskulo was intelligent, cunning, and driven, and aware enough of his gifts to be vain about them. It was so rare to meet a man that lived up to expectations. If she hadn't been focused on a higher purpose, he might have been dating material. She smiled, bemused by the image of herself coming home to the man of the house. The tide not charted. At least he seemed like the kind of man who might understand. After all, he had demons of his own. His deceased sister, Sala Dorskulo. There'd been some verbal back and forth, but it was delightful matching wits with a male of such caliber. Dorskulo had fought her Tuscan nail, but he'd been doomed to lose from the start. He at least had the wit to appreciate he was being used, but life was always a matter of priorities, and his were inescapable. Dorskulo was vain, and no matter how worldly and inexperienced, Image was everything to vain men. If he had his way, his sister's links to the Silver Suns would stay in her grave forever. And that was fine. Really, it was. She had just what she needed, and all was right with the world.